Not every trail leads where you think it will. Some paths hidden deep in the forest hold secrets, secrets that wait patiently to be uncovered. And sometimes all it takes is a single photograph to drag the past into the present. It started on an overcast morning when a young family moved into a house far away from the chaos of the city. It was their dream, a fresh start in the tranquility of the woods. The house itself was nothing remarkable at first glance. An old structure with creaking floors and vintage wallpaper. But there was something else here, something waiting. As they began to settle in, the family discovered that the house held more than just the remnants of its previous owners. In the attic, hidden behind forgotten suitcases and discarded furniture, they stumbled upon a small, dusty box. Inside that box was a stack of Polaroid photographs. Yellowed at the edges, they captured the life of a different time, decades ago. Most of the photos were ordinary, families laughing, birthdays, Christmases, but one stood out. It was taken in the same house they now called home, but something was wrong. The image was blurred, with shadows stretching unnaturally across the floor. In the corner of the photo, a woman stood frozen, mid-motion, her expression locked in terror. The family stared at the image, puzzled. There was something eerie about it, something they couldn't quite explain. But who was she? And why was she so afraid? Days passed, and the photo continued to linger in their minds. Soon, it became impossible to ignore the questions that came with it. Why had this Polaroid been left behind? And more importantly, what had happened in this house so many years ago? Unbeknownst to the family, this house held a dark history. Decades earlier, it was the scene of a tragic and mysterious disappearance. A young woman had gone missing on a stormy night, her belongings left scattered through the home as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. The locals whispered about what had happened. Some believed she had fled, while others were convinced something far more sinister had occurred. But no one had proof. No one had seen her after that night, except for that Polaroid. And now, all these years later, the photograph had resurfaced, perhaps trying to tell them something. It wasn't long before strange things began happening. At first it was subtle. A door that closed on its own, faint footsteps echoing upstairs when no one was there. But as the days passed, the family realized they were not alone in the house. The youngest child claimed to see a figure in the hallway late at night, a shadow that would stand motionless watching him. At first, the parents dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination, until they saw it too. The family became obsessed with the Polaroid. They searched through old town records, determined to find out who the woman was. And then they found it, a news clipping buried in the town archives. The woman in the photograph had been reported missing the night of a violent storm. Her fiancé claimed she'd run off, but neighbors had heard screams coming from the house. The authorities searched, but no trace of her was ever found. Except for that photograph, the one taken mere moments before her disappearance. Convinced the Polaroid held a clue to her fate, the family began to see more signs. The figure in the hallway became bolder, showing up not just at night, but in broad daylight. Objects would disappear, only to reappear in strange places. And always, that photograph seemed to move on its own. They would place it in one room and find it waiting for them in another. Fearing for their safety, the family made the decision to leave. But on the morning of their departure, they found something horrifying. Sitting in the center of their living room was a new Polaroid. This time, it wasn't from the past. It was a picture of them, taken while they slept. The Polaroid had been a warning, a call from the past. The woman had never left. She was trapped in the house, forever caught between worlds, trying desperately to reveal the truth. Her fiancé hadn't told the whole story. He had never let her leave, and now she was bound to the house. A ghost tethered to her final moments, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. And though the family left that day, They knew they would never truly escape. The past has a way of following you, and sometimes it only takes a single photograph to pull you back in. Next time you stumble across an old photo, think carefully. You never know what story it might be trying to tell you, or whose eyes are still watching. Every year, as summer fades and the air grows crisp, small towns welcome traveling carnivals, bringing bright lights, laughter, and excitement. But not every carnival is what it seems. Some bring with them secrets, shadows, and nightmares. This is the story of one such carnival, the Phantom Carnival. It was late September when the posters first appeared. Out of nowhere, bright, colorful flyers were plastered on every lamppost and bulletin board in town. The Carnival of Wonders, they called it, promising thrills, chills, and attractions unlike any the town had seen before. No one could remember seeing the carnival arrive, but the excitement spread like wildfire. The townspeople hadn't had an event this grand in years. Children begged their parents to take them, and even the adults, intrigued by the promises of the strange attractions, planned to attend. And by the next morning, it was there, seemingly overnight. A sprawling carnival with tents of every color and shape, towering rides, and a massive Ferris wheel that touched the sky. But there was something odd about it, something out of place. None of the townspeople had seen the workers or heard the sounds of construction, yet the carnival stood, waiting for its guests. On the first night, the entire town gathered at the carnival's entrance, buzzing with excitement. As the gates creaked open, they were welcomed by the ringmaster, a tall figure dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face hidden behind a porcelain mask. His voice echoed through the air like it came from another time. "Welcome, dear friends," he said, his voice silky smooth. "Step inside and witness wonders beyond your wildest dreams. But be warned, once you enter, you may never want to leave." The crowd chuckled, assuming it was part of the show. They had no idea how true his words would become. At first, the carnival seemed like any other. Games with rigged prizes, cotton candy, and dazzling rides that spun until the world became a blur. But as the night wore on, some of the attractions revealed themselves to be far more sinister. One of the most popular attractions was the Hall of Mirrors, where people entered laughing, only to exit with pale faces and wide, fearful eyes. They whispered to each other about the reflections they saw inside, not of themselves, but of strangers, people long gone. One woman claimed she saw her own reflection grow older, decaying before her eyes, until there was nothing left but a skeleton staring back at her. Another man swore he saw a figure standing behind him, only to turn around and find no one there. Then there was the Ferris wheel. From a distance it was mesmerizing, a giant spinning wheel of lights. But those who dared to ride it told a different story. As the wheel turned higher and higher, they began to see things, strange things. At the top, the view wasn't of the town below, but of something else entirely. Twisted landscapes, barren wastelands, and shadowy figures standing in the distance, watching. When the ride finally ended, a few patrons stumbled off, shaking their heads in disbelief. But others never came back down. By the end of the night, several people were missing. Their friends and family searched the carnival grounds, calling out their names, but it was as if they had vanished into thin air. The carnival staff claimed they had never seen the missing people at all. The final and most terrifying attraction was the maze. Tucked away behind the main carnival grounds, it promised thrills for the brave-hearted. Many entered, eager to prove themselves. But the deeper they ventured, the more twisted the maze became. The walls seemed to shift and stretch, pulling them into endless corridors. What began as fun turned into panic as they realized they couldn't find their way out. Shadows darted between the walls, and distant whispers echoed, as if the maze itself was alive, hungry. Hours passed, and the laughter faded into screams. Some swore they saw figures watching them from the corners, figures that resembled the missing townspeople. And then, one by one, they too disappeared into the darkness. By the third night, the town was in a panic. More people had vanished, and those who returned from the carnival spoke of strange and terrifying encounters. Yet no matter how fearful they were, something continued to draw them back. It was as if the carnival itself had a hold on them. Despite the growing danger, some couldn't resist the call. They returned to the gates, compelled by some unseen force, even as they knew, deep down, they might not come back. Perhaps it was the ringmaster's voice, so smooth, so convincing. Or perhaps it was the carnival itself, feeding off their fears, growing stronger with every soul it claimed. On the last night, only a handful of brave souls ventured to the carnival. As the clock struck midnight, something strange happened. The lights flickered out one by one, and the entire carnival was swallowed by darkness. The townspeople rushed to the field the next morning, hoping to find answers, but what they found was far more terrifying. The carnival was gone. Every tent, every ride, every game booth vanished without a trace, as if it had never existed. But that wasn't all. Those who had disappeared were never found. It was as though the carnival had taken them, leaving nothing behind but whispers in the wind. No one knew where it had come from, or where it had gone, and the town was left with nothing but haunting memories and unanswered questions. To this day, the story of the Phantom Carnival is passed down through generations. Some say it returns once every few decades, drawn to small towns where no one expects it. They say that if you see the posters, you should never attend, because the carnival doesn't just entertain, it consumes. Beware the Carnival of Wonders. You may enter for the thrill, but you might just become part of its twisted collection. Forever. If you're enjoying these stories so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Your support motivates us to keep creating even more great content. Now back to our final story. On Halloween night, the veil between the living and the dead grows thin. It's a night of masks, a night of mischief. But for one man, it was the night of a deal with death itself. This is the story of the Reaper's Bargain, a tale of life, death, and the choices that haunt us all. Halloween had arrived in the small, quiet town. Houses were adorned with carved pumpkins, glowing jack-o'-lanterns lighting up the streets as children in costumes scurried door to door. But inside one particular house, away from the laughter and celebration, a man sat alone, unaware that his life was about to change forever. He wasn't one for Halloween anymore. Life had worn him down. Bills piled up, work had become a grind, and the spark that once made him feel alive had long since flickered out. Tonight he just wanted to be left alone. But sometimes the things we run from come looking for us. As the night grew darker, a knock echoed through his house. Slow, deliberate. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the hour was late. Hesitant, he approached the door, peering through the peephole. But no one was there. Just the cold October wind rustling through the fallen leaves. But just as he turned to close the door, something caught his eye. A figure, tall, shadowed, standing at the edge of his yard. It wasn't a trick-or-treater. It wasn't anyone from the neighborhood. The figure moved closer, its form barely illuminated by the dim streetlights. Cloaked in black, with a hood pulled low over its face, it was unmistakable. The Grim Reaper had come to call. The man froze, every instinct screaming to shut the door and hide. But before he could move, The Reaper spoke, a voice that echoed like a cold wind through a graveyard. "You've lived your life, and now it's time to pay your debt." Time seemed to slow, the weight of the words hanging heavy in the air. His time had come. But death, it seemed, was not without mercy. The Reaper held out a bony hand and made the man an offer. "I am here for your soul," it said, "but tonight, on this hallowed eve, there is a choice. I can take you now, or we can make a bargain." The man's heart raced. A bargain with death? What could that possibly mean? He could feel the weight of his own mortality pressing down on him, but curiosity, desperation, and fear drove him to listen. "One task," the Reaper whispered. "If you succeed, I will leave you in peace, and your soul will be spared, for now. But fail, and I will claim you before the clock strikes midnight." The task was simple, or so it seemed. He was to leave his house, walk deep into the woods at the edge of town, and find a grave, one that had been forgotten, buried beneath the soil for centuries. But there was one condition. He must not look back, no matter what he heard, no matter what he saw. If he did, it would be the end. The man, his heart pounding, agreed. What choice did he have? He threw on his coat, and as he stepped outside, the wind bit at his skin. The Reaper was already gone, but the weight of its presence lingered. With nothing but a flashlight and his will to survive, he set off towards the woods. As he entered the forest, the trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The deeper he walked, the quieter the world became, until the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath his feet. It wasn't long before the sounds began. At first it was just the wind whistling through the trees, but then faint whispers. He stopped, straining to hear. Was it his imagination? Or was something out there, watching him? Voices called out, soft at first, but growing louder with each step. They seemed to come from behind him, pleading, desperate. "Turn back," they whispered. "Help us." But he remembered the Reaper's warning, "Don't look back." His hands trembled as he continued forward, the voices growing louder, more insistent. He tried to shut them out, focusing only on the path ahead, but every step felt heavier, as though invisible hands were pulling at him, trying to drag him back. The deeper he went, the more he felt it, a presence lurking just out of sight. His breath quickened, his heart pounded in his chest. He could feel eyes on him, watching from the shadows. But he didn't dare turn around, not yet. Then came the laughter, cold, hollow, echoing through the trees. It wasn't human. It was something else, something old, something cruel. The man's instincts screamed at him to run, but he knew he couldn't escape what was behind him. And that's when his flashlight went out. In the darkness, he stood frozen, listening to the sound of his own breathing. The voices were closer now, just behind him. He could almost feel their breath on his neck. But still, he didn't look back. The whispers turned into screams, agonized, terrified screams. They were calling his name now, begging for him to help, pleading for him to turn around. His resolve began to crack. What if it was real? What if someone needed him? He took one step forward, then another, but the pull to turn around was overwhelming. And then, silence. The forest went completely still. The air, thick with tension, hung around him. He hesitated. In that moment, with everything he had, he fought the urge to turn. His muscles ached, his mind screamed. But he didn't give in. At last, after what felt like hours, he found it. The grave. Overgrown with vines, barely visible beneath the soil, it was exactly as the Reaper had described. He stood over it, trembling, waiting for whatever was to come next. The forest was silent once more, The whispers, the screams, gone. And then, behind him, a cold breath brushed against his neck. "You did well," the Reaper's voice whispered from right behind him. "But there is one last choice." The Reaper offered him a final temptation. He could walk away now, and his soul would be spared. Or he could turn around, look into death's eyes, and know the truth of what waits on the other side. He could feel the weight of the decision crushing him, to live in ignorance or to face the ultimate truth. His hand hovered at his side, and then... No one knows what he chose that night. All that's known is that the man was never the same. He returned to town just before midnight, but something in his eyes had changed. He never spoke of what happened in the woods, and he never mentioned the Reaper again. But those who saw him afterward swore they could hear whispers, echoes of something from beyond, following him wherever he went. And when Halloween came around the next year, he was gone, without a trace. If you loved this episode, be sure to check out our other videos. Thank you for watching. See you on our next video.